you? Betcha was asking me about you. He's like, she is not the Dem chair anymore. I was like, no, this is Hannah.
Nice to meet you.
All right, Hannah, I'm getting this started.
Okay.
It needs there.
Okay, just right here?
Yep, just like that.
Okay, am I moving at all? Just like pivot to follow him?
Or just the crowd. If you can get as much of the crowd as you can.
Okay.
That would be great. Okay, thank you. Tell
Okay.
me if you need anything.
Will do.
I know.
Holy shit.
I grew up Jewish, and that's how we show love too. It's like, oh, you're part of the family now. So gosh, her 80th birthday party is all of us.
I know.
Christmas.
I don't fully understand my instructions.
The guest of honor is here. I'm Kathy Broderick, and I am the Democratic Party Chair for Midland County. And that is an elected job that doesn't pay anything. So that clapping is all I get, and it was wonderful. Thank you. Tonight I'd like to acknowledge our elected officials. We have two people that I've spotted here. One of them is walking right here on the front, and he is Judge Billy Johnson. That's our Precinct 3 Justice of the Peace. The other elected officials back there in a pink shirt, that is Luis Sanchez. Luis is County Commissioner for Precinct 3. We are really proud that you are here tonight. Y'all do a great job representing us. So thank you for that. It is my honor to introduce the person that is going to introduce Beto. This is a person who, this person's a doer. That's what I call her. She's a doer. There ain't no, you either do or you mildew. She don't mildew. She can make some stuff happen. And whenever I need to make something happen, I make a phone call to Shirley and say, how do you think I ought to do this? So, my goal is to be the best doer that I can with my friend Shirley. And with all my other friends in the Democratic Party. They're all out among all of y'all here tonight. This stuff does not happen by itself. So without further ado, here's my friend Shirley that makes stuff happen, and she's going to introduce Beto.
Thank you. First, I want to say thanks to all of you that have made it happen by coming out here. Yeah, we knew the weather was going to change, but I'm not going to talk too much on that because it might start raining in a minute. But at this time, I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker of the evening. And please get your thoughts together and have questions for him because he needs to hear from us as to what it is we need to do about getting out to vote. And before he comes, again, I just want to encourage each and every one of you, if you know anyone that is not registered to vote, to tell them that the importance of going out and getting registered and be ready to vote. Again, at this time, I don't even see him, but yes, I do now. I have the pleasure of introducing, I got his name. Beto O'Rourke, who is from El Paso, Texas. And I'm one of those people who can tell you about me better than myself. So therefore, I'm going to let him come on up and tell you who he is, what he does, what he's going to do, what he's not going to do. At this time, if you would put your hands together and accept our speaker of the hour.
Hey, how's everybody doing? So good to be with you all, and thank you for being out and welcoming us back to Midland. The last time that I got to be with people in Midland was actually a really sad occasion. It was in 2019. We just had a horrific mass shooting in El Paso, Texas at a Walmart. You all remember it well because it wasn't a month later that you had your own horrific mass shooting right here in this community. And when we learned about what you were going through, after what we had just been through, we decided to get in the truck and drive out here and be with the community and just listen to folks and just be there. I didn't know what, if any, help I could be or provide, but getting to meet some of those families, getting to talk to some of the doctors and nurses and frontline staff in the hospitals that were caring for the victims of that mass shooting on August 31st, 2019. It just felt like the right thing to do, and it felt like the right place to be. I knew it was the right place to be. And I knew that because when we had endured our own tragedy in El Paso, you all had reached out to us. And those of you who have my cell phone number, you called or you texted, you checked in, you said, are you okay? Is your family okay? Tell me about the community. What can we do for you all? I think that's the spirit of Midland. That's the spirit of Texas. That's the spirit of El Paso. That's the spirit of this country. And we've got to make sure that at this moment of truth for all of us, the divisions couldn't be any deeper. This country could not be any more polarized. That we remind ourselves of that and remember who we are at our best. Because I really do think this is a test that we face at this moment right now on the 3rd of June, 2021, unlike any that we've ever faced as a country before. And I want to lay it out for you, but I want to tell you that I came out to Midland. First stop on this drive for democracy. It's 3 weeks long. We're driving the whole state. You may or may not know this, but I ran for Senate in 2018, and I went to 254 counties at the time. And so I can't get it out of my system. I want to see the state again. I want to be with people, and I want to stop watching my television, yelling at my television, yelling from your television, and I want to be with people where they are and listen to them about what's most important to them. And I want to begin, if I might, by sharing what got me out on the road again and why I think this is such a moment of crisis and why we must meet it with the urgency that it demands. And it's about our democracy. It's what Shirley just talked about right now. It's why Kathy Broderick sent the call out to all of you, and so many of you responded. It's because we're being tested unlike any time in this country's history. On the 6th of January of this year, you had the first successful breach of the United States Capitol, our citadel of democracy, the most sacred place in this representative republic that I can think of. 5 people, including a Capitol police officer, were killed. They constructed a public gallows in the plaza in front of the Capitol to hang the then Vice President of the United States of America, Mike Pence. They threatened to kill members of Congress, and I think if they had been a little luckier, they might very well have murdered them where they worked, Democrats and Republicans alike. That followed the trafficking in this idea that many people have called the big lie, that somehow there was widespread voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election that unfairly denied Donald Trump a second term in office. And the way that this lie goes, that voter fraud was concentrated in places like Detroit, in Atlanta, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and in those states, all in communities that are Black majority or Mexican American majority. That somehow those who are not white in this country are perpetrating a fraud on the rest of this country. And that big lie, first uttered by then President Donald Trump, and then shared by those complicit in it, members of Congress, sworn to serve and protect all of us regardless of the party that they might be affiliated with, did the same. In fact, many of them voting to overturn the lawfully, legitimately, democratically decided presidential election from their seats of power in the very Capitol that had just survived that attack. Well, what follows on the 6th of January is in 47 state legislatures, including right here in Texas, more than 360 voter suppression bills are introduced to limit who can vote and how we can vote and what happens after we vote. Here in Texas, the bill was called Senate Bill 7, or SB 7. Here are a couple of things that it would have done if it had passed. It would have made those with a disability required to disclose their disability to an elections official, to a complete stranger. So imagine, if you will, because this situation does not yet exist in Texas, you are a veteran who served this country honorably in Vietnam, in Korea, in Afghanistan, or Iraq. And you've come back home to Midland, Texas, with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma. And now your government is asking you to prove that so that you can vote an absentee ballot. I guarantee you, because I know so many veterans back in El Paso, and I served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, so many veterans will have nothing to do with that. We took their word for it. We sent them to put their life on the line for this country, and they very nearly lost it. And we're not even a week from Memorial Day, remembering those who did lose their lives in service to this country. And now we won't take their word for it when they tell us they have a disability and they want to vote by mail, securely, safely, and without fraud. But that's not all. They also eliminated Sunday morning voting. Now, why would you do that? It might be because there's a program in many Texas cities known as Souls to the Polls, primarily centered in black churches, where the congregation after the service walks or drives or takes the bus to the nearest polling location and votes together. They may vote for Democrats, they may vote for Republicans. It doesn't matter. They're voting and participating in our democracy. Souls to the polls would have been eliminated in that bill. Poll watchers, partisan activists allowed free reign inside the polling place to intimidate the voters who go in there. And unfortunately, there's a long and sordid history in the state of Texas of partisan poll watchers. They used to be called members of the Ku Klux Klan, who try to stop voters of color, and specifically black voters, from being able to cast their ballot. That was in SB 7. But most chillingly of all was a provision that was introduced at the last minute that would allow the state of Texas to overturn elections based on the allegation of fraud. Like Georgia, like they tried to do in Georgia, like the president's lawyers tried to do in Pennsylvania. Like Rudolph Giuliani called the Secretary of State in Georgia and said, can you change the results of this election? If SB 7 had passed, then statutorily, those Texas legislators, this state could overturn a legitimately decided contest for Congress, for county commissioner, for the United States president, now that we have 40 electoral college votes in the next election in 2024 for president. But thank God for the Texas House Democrats, who, though they are in a minority, demonstrated to us and to the rest of the country what leadership looks like. They contested this bill. They questioned it on its merits. They met in good faith with their Republican counterparts to see if they could not improve upon this bill. And they asked very legitimate questions. Why, good sir, would you want to cancel voting on Sunday morning? Do you know that my constituents like to vote on Sunday morning and that the majority of them are African American? Could any of these things be connected? And the response from the Republican author of the bill is, well, we just want to make sure that our poll workers have a chance to go to church on Sunday, and that's what this is all about. But when they could no longer, in good faith and through the small d democratic rules, have a chance to participate in the shaping of that legislation that was going to disproportionately affect their constituents, they walked out. They left the Capitol. They decided that these extraordinary measures proposed in SB 7 that strike at the very heart of our democracy required an extraordinary response. And that's exactly what they did, and they stopped it. And what I hope is that those United States Senate Democrats who command a majority in that institution, just as we do in the United States House of Representatives, just as we have in the White House right now with President Biden, take a page out of our book right here in Texas and with the For the People Act, which would do more than any major piece of voting rights and civil rights legislation since the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act, to restore voting rights and to expand voting rights in the United States. I hope those U.S. senators and I hope President Joe Biden are watching Texas right now and learning from the example that has been set here. Because if they fail, if we fail, because look, this is on all of us, then what Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of earth will perish from this very planet. 247 years and counting does not guarantee you another 247, or even another year or two or three. With 47 state legislatures working on this, with QAnon conspiracy theorists talking about Donald Trump resuming his presidency in August of this summer, with political violence in the very heart of this democracy in our capital in Washington, D.C., the lines have been drawn. This has been defined as a moment of truth, and we cannot be found wanting. Here's our opportunity. 5 big things that I want you to think about that we're up against. One is the political corruption that makes this possible. Now, this is political corruption that might be legalized. You know, it might be okay, you might not be convicted or go to jail for it, but it's corruption by any other name. What I'm talking about is the fact that those with money, the very wealthy, the big donors, the corporations, are increasingly calling the shots in our democracy. I don't know if you noticed this, but in February, during a winter storm in this state, the energy capital, and I'm saying this from the Permian Basin right now, the energy capital of North America could not keep the power on, could not keep the heat running, could not keep the lights on or the water flowing in millions of homes across the state. More than 700 of our fellow Texans lost their lives. Children froze to death trying to keep warm in their beds. There was a veteran who actually froze to death in his truck trying to get an oxygen tank because he'd run out in his house, couldn't get warm, died of hypothermia. A young girl died next to her mother, who also succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning as they tried to warm themselves in their car, in their own garage. Did not know any better because they never thought they would have to face this in this country in the 21st century. But when you follow the dots and the campaign contributions, and you realize that our current sitting governor, who appoints to the Public Utility Commission, which has oversight authority over the ERCOT grid operators, received checks and contributions totaling more than $1 million from a single contributor, because there are no campaign finance limits in the state of Texas, hundreds of thousands of dollars from other contributors, all of whom profited from what happened in Texas, the death, the devastation, the loss of life, and what we endured. Some people got fantastically wealthy from it. And they're the same people who were able to contribute fantastic amounts of money to our governor. The For the People Act that I mentioned right now would limit the power of corporations and corporate donors and make sure that the power of everyday people is strengthened and raised as an alternative. That's the first thing that I want you to know about. The second, and this is one where if you're a Republican or a Democrat, I've got to think you agree with me. You're sick and tired of the fact that in this country, especially in the state of Texas, it is members of Congress who choose their voters instead of the other way around. They call it redistricting, but we all know the real name for it. It is gerrymandering. The For the People Act would take care of this second problem by setting up independent, nonpartisan, meaning Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz are not allowed in the room, nonpartisan redistricting commissions to draw real congressional boundaries that truly represent the people of this state. That's the second thing that we can take care of in the For the People Act, pending before the United States Senate right now. The third is access to the polls. I mentioned what they're trying to do here in Texas, but you saw what they already signed into law in Georgia. You're not allowed to give a bottle of cold water to a voter who's been waiting in line for 6, 7, 8 hours in order to be able to cast their ballot. And they're waiting 6, 7, and 8 hours because states like Georgia and Texas close one polling place after another. We closed 750 polling places in the fastest growing state in majority Mexican American and African American neighborhoods over the last 8 years. That's why people are waiting in line for so long, and now you can't even give them a sip of water. Don't you think that's going to mean that people are going to give up and go home, or not even try to vote in the first place? The For the People Act guarantees access to the ballot box. That's the third thing that I want you to understand. The fourth one, and this is also really, really important. It's the big lie that we're up against right now. It's political violence that we see brewing all over this country. And listen, I know that we all in Midland, in Odessa, and in El Paso, we have a history of gun violence, and specifically with these guns that were fashioned and engineered and designed and sold to militaries because they are devastatingly effective at killing people. I'm talking about an AR-15 or an AK-47. We are routinely now seeing people show up with these weapons of war in our state houses. I don't know if you saw the chilling image of the Michigan State House. Those legislators are hard at work, and in a balcony overlooking them, there are protesters armed for battle with flak jackets on, bulletproof vests, these weapons of war and ammo clips and belts all over their bodies. Now, either they like to dress up and it makes them feel better, or more likely than not, they're trying to intimidate those lawmakers, and the message cannot be lost on them. Vote our way, follow along with what we want you to do, or else. You saw what happened in El Paso. 23 people murdered because the person who killed them feared an invasion of Hispanics who are going to politically take over this country. That was what was in his manifesto that he published before the end of the day. We need to make sure that we quell this political violence and the threat of future political violence, and having free and fair, legitimately, lawfully decided elections will help us do that. The last thing that I want to make sure that we remember, the fifth thing, and this is pretty important in what I am told is a very red part of the state. It may just be a non-voting part of the state. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. Whether you're red, whether you're blue, whether you don't think in those terms, I think we can all agree that we have seen the effective death of bipartisanship, compromise, and common ground in this country. It is zero sum, winner take all. Your gain is my loss. My gain is your loss. We are not working towards the common public good in this country anymore. When Mitch McConnell, who happens to be the minority leader in the Senate, says his number one job right now is to defeat everything that Joe Biden does, just like he said his number one job when Barack Obama was elected president was to make him a one-term president. I mean, I may not agree with him on everything, but it would sure warm my heart if Mitch McConnell said, my number one job is to serve and deliver for the American people. And I'll work with Democrats or Republicans or independents or whoever it takes to get the job done. That's what I want out of the people who represent me. Well, you've seen this lack of bipartisanship completely break down the functioning of our government. You saw it in the state capitol on Sunday. You see it in the United States Capitol every single day. There's one thing standing in our way right now to getting the For the People Act passed and some bipartisanship moving forward in the halls of power. And that is something known as the filibuster. It's got a lot of syllables. Not all of us understand everything that it does. I'll be the first to admit I'm still learning a lot about the filibuster and its history. But what it essentially says is that the majority party in the United States Senate is not able to pass legislation on a majority vote. You have to pass a 60-vote threshold in a 100-member institution to be able to get anything done, and therefore nothing will get done unless the majority party has those 60 votes. If we removed the filibuster, or at least changed the rules about how it is deployed, then I think not only could the majority party, whether they be Republicans or Democrats as we have now, not only could they get more done and show real progress for the American people, the minority party, in my opinion, would have an incentive to play along and to compromise and to work with you. If right now I can just drop a note with the Senate clerk and say, I object, and that stops all progress, then what incentive do I have to sit down with you across the table and find that common ground and those points of consensus and compromise? Absolutely none. So, if we're going to be able to get any of this done, we're going to need to change the rules in the Senate to allow for that kind of compromise and that level of progress. Now, this is where we come to the action steps that we can take. And then I'm going to turn the mic over to you. Let's listen to anyone who's got something to say. First, if you want to stop this legislation in Texas, that SB 7 bill, though House Democrats defeated it during the regular session, there's a very good chance that a far more pernicious version of it is going to arise in a special session soon. It wouldn't hurt for you to pick up the phone and call your state rep or state senator, even if you know that they're going to vote for it, or you think you know that they're going to vote for it. I think it helps for them to hear from you. I still believe in democracy. I hope they do too. They represent you. Let them hear from you. Second thing is I want to make sure that President Biden, who I think as the most powerful man on planet Earth, has the ability to get the For the People Act passed, knows that it is important to all of us. There's a great story that Stacey Abrams just told me last night. I did an Instagram Live interview with her. And she said that in 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Andrew Young were meeting with Lyndon Baines Johnson in the White House. This is 1964. And they were pleading with the president to pass a voting rights bill. And apparently President Johnson said to Dr. King and future Ambassador Young, I don't have the power. These members of Congress will never get this thing passed. And so they left, and in the telling of the story, Andrew Young was a little dejected. And he said, well, I guess that's it. And then Dr. King turns to him and says, no, we can still do this. And Andrew Young asks, well, how do you figure? And Dr. King says, we've just got to get the president some power. Now, Joe Biden is saying something a little bit like what LBJ said in 1964. Look, I'm just one man. I may be in the White House, but those senators don't want to seem to move on this piece of legislation. I think if enough people across this country, maybe even especially coming from some unlikely places like Midland, Texas, reach out to the President of the United States and say, Mr. President, we have your back. And listen, you don't have to be a Democrat to do this. You can be a Republican and say, look, I don't agree with you on every issue, Mr. President, but on this one, I want to make sure that every eligible voter in this country can be heard, can cast their ballot and have that vote counted. Will you please use the power you have, Mr. President, to get this done? That's the second thing I want to ask you to consider doing. And the last one, even if we are unsuccessful, God forbid, in passing this major voting rights legislation, the For the People Act, even if we're unsuccessful in stopping this voter suppression bill in Texas, we still have elections to contest, candidates to support, votes to cast. And I want to make sure that even if the playing field is not level, even if the game has been rigged to the advantage of one party over the other, some Texans over other Texans, that we still fight with all that we have. To that end, there's something that you can do in the most voter-suppressed state in the country. This is the hardest state in which to vote and to register. No online voter registration in the state of Texas. You know that you can't use your student ID at the University of Texas Permian Basin to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you can use your license to carry a firearm as long as you still need one of those. Now that constitutional carry's passed, maybe that doesn't even suffice. What if we registered more voters in this state and just numerically, by the math of the deal, have enough Texans out there so that we can win some of these elections? In 2020, arguably the most important presidential election since 1860 or 1864, 7 million eligible Texans did not vote. What the hell is going on, right? I've called and talked to some of those Texans, and they say, hey, you know what, buddy? I'd love to vote. That's a luxury for me. I work 3 jobs, $7.25 an hour at each. In fact, I'm at Circle K right now, and I got to see a customer. I'll see you later. No time for that guy to vote. Others are confused about the rules and all these things that I just told you about that the Texas legislature is trying to do. But the most common answer given for not voting is that no one asked me to vote. No one showed up at my door. No one tried to register me to vote. No one was there at the food bank when I was picking up the box of food and offered me the opportunity to get on the rolls. All of us can become certified voter registrars here in Midland County or in Ector County or whatever county you live in. I'm certified in my home county of El Paso. I'm certified in Webb County, where Laredo is. And today I went down to the Midland County Courthouse Annex and got certified to be a volunteer deputy registrar here. And I just registered my first voter in Midland. So it feels good. So those are the things I want you to consider doing. Those three things. Reach out to your representatives here in Texas on the state level. Reach out to President Biden on the For the People Act. And number three, get yourself certified as a volunteer deputy registrar and help us register more voters here in Midland or in Odessa or wherever it is you live. I'm going to turn the microphone over to a couple of very special guests, and then they are going to turn the microphone over to you or to anyone who'd like to have their say. And by the way, in keeping with the spirit of democracy, you do not have to agree with me on what I just said in order to speak. You can challenge me if you wish. You can ask me a question. You can offer your point of view. The more points of view offered, the better, in my opinion. I do want to thank Dee. Dee, I see you back there. As I was parking, Dee said, "What is going on at the park right now?" And I said, "We're going to be talking democracy. Come on over." And Dee, you did. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, we're really grateful. And I hope that you'll be a VDR as well and sign up with us. So the next person I'm going to introduce is someone that's been a really good friend to me over the years of public service, when I was a member of Congress, when I was here in your community running for the United States Senate. In fact, I remember seeing Gene Collins. Gene, I think it was like the day after or 2 days after Christmas in 2017, we had a town hall in Odessa. And Gene was there to introduce us and to connect me with members of the community. He's the president of the Odessa chapter of the NAACP. He's working on some incredibly exciting developments when it comes to climate and our environment right here in the Permian Basin, and using the know-how from oil and gas workers to make the most of this expertise, to make sure that we save jobs and create more in this area, and also save our planet at the same time. So, Gene, would love you to come up and offer some comments as well. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Beto. First of all, I want to thank God Almighty. I'm a man of faith, for bringing us through this difficult time. He's brought us through the pandemic. He brought us through a period where we had to redefine America based on the murders that were taking place of innocent people. He's also given us an opportunity for change. And I want to thank all of you for standing strong for liberty and justice for all. I promise I won't preach. Beto didn't say I was a preacher, but I am. So if you give me a few amens, I'll sit down in a moment. But we are also very fortunate to have a man like Beto O'Rourke. Actually, I met Beto before we even shook hands. I met him in El Paso. We were having an event there, and he was just announcing that he was running. He was running for a Senate, and we decided that we would communicate on a very high level. And I was surprised how quick a learner he is. And the reason he's a quick learner is because he listens to everyone. He respects all of your thoughts, all of your pains, and he internalizes them. And he tries to come up with solutions. That is very rare today in politics. Most people have their own agenda, but he's going to listen to you. And if you need help in one area or another, he's going to internalize that and do what he can to move that forward. He did so much to galvanize the whole state of Texas, especially the African-American community, in the last couple of election cycles. We set all kinds of records across the state. We, in some of the smaller areas, we had people where no African-American had ever been elected before. And you know what happened in Harris County. All the African-American women who are sitting on the bench as judges, making decisions that are fair, finally, and that affect us all. So when Beto asked me to be down here today, I said, I will be there because you are a rare vision of hope. And as long as he's around, I think we all have hope for a better day. Let's get him elected. Let's get him elected. I know he hasn't announced. But save up your money and your energy. And I think there's a mansion in Austin that he would fit nicely in. I'll come down there. I'll come there and help decorate if that's what it takes. But let's think about that along the way. Let me share something with you. He talked about a lot of legislation. One affects us quite a bit. Critical race theory. I know you've heard a lot about that. Critical race theory. That means keeping everybody totally ignorant of our history. People of faith know that ye shall know the what? Truth. And the truth shall set you free. We're not going to be free as a country until truth is out there. But we have a party that is determined to keep truth away from it. In fact, it's going to be a crime for teachers to teach critical race history. And I scratched my head and I said, I wonder why they are so adamant about this. Well, a couple of days ago, our president was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, reviving and reliving the story of the massacre there at Greenwood, Black Wall Street. And we saw a lot of people who said, I lived in Tulsa and didn't even know that happened. They deliberately kept that out of the books because it makes them look like what they are. People who will sacrifice others for their own doing. But the truth of the matter is, it didn't happen only in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's a place in North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina. Shortly after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, African Americans were elected to city council. They were judges and police officers. They were public servants. They were sending people to Congress. All of a sudden, a group of people decided that we don't want any African Americans judging us. So what they did, they formed militias, similar to the militia that came out of Midland that went down to the border a few years ago and decided that they were going to control the border by themselves. They also floated out all kinds of lies. Now, they didn't have Facebook and Twitter, but somehow the lies got out to the right people, that the black people were there raping women, white women, and they stirred up everybody in that area. And because they felt entitled, they went into Wilmington with guns, pistols, and one of those old kind of guns, a Gatling gun. They tell me I'm a little too young to know anything about a Gatling gun. And destroyed that town, put themselves up as the officials, sent their own people to Congress. And right after that, they started passing laws that call you 2/3 of a person. And your vote didn't count as an African American as a full vote. They put a factor on each one of your votes. I am certain that the reason today that they don't want critical race theory taught is because they are using some of the same identical tactics. If you watch it, they're using the same tactics. Now, in Texas, everybody can get a gun. As Beto said, they can get a gun. In fact, I was teasing him earlier this morning and said they are using the Oprah Winfrey method. You get a gun, you get a gun, I get a gun, all the crooks get a gun, everybody gets a gun, and we can all go to hell together in a handbasket. That's one thing that they're doing, quite similar to what happened in Wilmington. And then spreading the lies. There are so many lies. We are getting lied on by the Republican Party. by Russia, by China, and everyone. So let's make sure that we understand truth, and let's search out truth, and don't believe everything that you know. You know, our response in Texas to the mass shooting has been to give everybody a gun and also to invite the NRA to Texas. We roll out the red carpet for the National Rifle Association, the biggest perpetrators of weapons in the whole country. So it looks like to me they're trying to put everything in place so we can have another Wilmington, if necessary, in Texas. Let's be aware of that. And let's do our best to find truth. And let's do our best to encourage others to get involved in this process. We can outvote folks. We are still a little shy when it comes to turnout. But if we can turn voters out like yourselves, who understand that there is a mass conspiracy to destroy this nation, if those of you who are of faith can challenge other faith leaders to express their opinions on even things like children on the border, if we can do that, then we're well on our way to turning this whole thing around. And we will be able to give Beto O'Rourke some power so he can do what God has called him to do. And I believe, based on what I have seen and experienced, that he has been called to do this particular thing at this particular time. So let's walk together and continue to move forward, work together, and let's try to get truth out there to everyone that we know. God bless you. We have our mission set, and I believe that he didn't bring us this far to leave us. Did he? I don't believe that. So let's walk together, children,
Of course.
and let's not get weary in our walk. Thank you so much, and I'll be glad to answer other questions that you might have.
Thank you, Gene. Very grateful to you. There are going to be some clipboards going through. If you are interested, please share your contact information with us. I know I gave you a bunch to remember, those 5 points and then the 3 points. And I've got to get this down to just 1 point. But I'd love to send you a little bit of information on those 3 action steps that we can all take together and help you get certified as a volunteer deputy registrar. So if you don't mind signing in on the sheet, we would appreciate it. I'm so grateful to have the chance to listen to you and to learn from you, as I did again when we were talking this morning, and we shared some history back and forth with one another. And I tell you what, if nothing else, being in a public park with all of you, with an amplified sound system, if I do nothing more than this, I am happy. As long as we are bringing people together, and from this, as Gene just said, committing ourselves to action and doing what this moment and this hour calls of us, then we've met this moment. So let's keep that up. We've got 2 more special speakers who are going to very briefly share their thoughts, and then we're turning the microphone over to you. Next up is former City Council member John Love, who's going to join us. And John, we want you to share some thoughts, and we want to thank you for your public service and for being here today.
Hello, I am John Love, former city councilman for the city of Midland, District 2, right here in Booker T. Washington Park. That's right. There's another Washington connection to this park that a lot of people don't know about. This parking lot right over here used to be tennis courts. It's where I learned to play tennis, and it had a plaque dedicated to Dr. Richard Washington, who used to be a physician here, an African-American physician that this community has forgotten about. And I want to make sure that you are aware that this park is both Booker T. Washington and also Dr. Richard Washington, who is deceased. 2 days ago, we observed the 100th anniversary of the worst racial massacre in this country, Greenwood. My grandparents were living in Greenwood at the time. My father was born the next decade. So it is by the grace of God that I stand here before you today. In 16 days, we're going to celebrate the 156th anniversary of General Granger reading the Emancipation Proclamation in Galveston on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after it was written. My mother's ancestors walked from Galveston to Pelham, Texas, to found a freedmen's colony right after this reading. Pelham is located between Dallas and Dallas and Waco. Fight back. Conservative interests in this state have done everything that they can to perpetuate a myth. That myth is that Texas is a conservative state. It is not a conservative state. What Texas does is they use voter suppression, gerrymandering, and they also use violence, historically violence, to keep you away from the polls, to keep you from voting. But you must fight back. Don't let don't let these sore losers win. They've tried to stop you before, and they'll try to do it again. Recently, it didn't work. Thank God for the Texas Democrat caucus and what they did by walking out of that legislative session. Thank God for what they did. But Governor Abbott is going to call a special session. He's going to call it back, and he's going to try to do it again. But we will fight back. All over this country, voter suppression laws are being enacted or being considered. And we all know that there has not been evidence of any voter fraud in this country at all. None. They say things like voter integrity, voter purity, but what they really mean is they want control. They don't want you to vote. They don't want your participation. They don't even want your opinion. All they want is your labor, and they want it cheap. But we will fight back. I'm running for United States Senate in 2024. To fight back. Like Beto said, we need to get rid of the Senate filibuster that was used to try to stop the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. We need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act to make sure that all Americans have the right to vote. You see, in democracy, people vote. It's dictators who don't want people to decide for themselves. And this is a democracy. Look, if conservatives won't or don't hold the American ideals in esteem, then we must do that. We must fight back. Remember those former slaves who marched from Galveston northward to find freedom, to pursue the American ideals. Remember those slaves. Because I can guarantee you that voting in 2021 or in 2024, when you'll have an opportunity to vote for me for United States Senate for Texas. Yes. It's a lot easier than it was in 1864, 1865. If you were black and registered to vote, then they would lynch you. Or it's a lot easier than in 1954 when they had poll taxes to try to hurt you economically to keep you from going to the polls. Or in 1964, right after the poll tax was abolished, it was Governor John Connally who was for annual voter registration to try to convince you to give up your right to vote. But we must fight back. We must have faith. We must persevere. And we must work hard. Make no mistake, we have got to work hard. This is nothing different from the history that we have seen. Nothing different at all. We must walk towards freedom and the right to vote. No matter what obstacles they put in our way, we will fight back with our vote. We will fight back with our vote. When they make it hard, go vote. When they withdraw the lines, go vote. When they call us names, go vote. When they threaten our way of life, go vote. When they lie, go vote. When they cry, go vote. When people die, go vote. When they break into the Capitol, when they break into the Capitol, register to vote and then go vote. I'm John Love. Please go to johnlove4texas.com. I'm running for United States Senate for the state of Texas. And please fight back. Go vote.
Amen.
All right, John Love, that was great. And I remember when I launched my Senate campaign, John, in early 2017. I think it was February or March. And I thought that was early. But you've got a whole year on me by launching this 2024 race here halfway through 2020. That's the way to start.
I've learned a lot from you.
That's the way to start. That was great. And thank you for also sharing your family's history. That was so powerful on the heels of watching President Biden, the first American president, travel to Tulsa to commemorate the massacre. More than 300 people murdered in Greenwood. We will never know because, as you said, they tried to extinguish the history, much as they tried to extinguish the families there. So that was so powerful. And folks, for me, it just increases the urgency around what we're doing right now. They say history may not repeat, but it rhymes. It sure feels like it's rhyming right now. Folks call what's happening now Jim Crow 2.0. Is that just a catchy phrase, or does that mean something? Well, when you think about what was happening in Jim Crow, John mentioned the poll tax, the literacy tests, the how many jelly beans are in this jar before we'll allow you to vote. They're talking about standardizing the elections right now in Texas, and who could be against that? Just like who could be against a poll tax or a literacy test, unless it is applied selectively and intended to stop some people from voting and increasing the power of others, which is exactly what happened in Jim Crow 1.0 and exactly what they're trying to do now. So it's on them for proposing this legislation. It's on us if we accept it and if we allow it to pass. So we have the power. We still have agency. As John said, we can vote. We can register to vote. We can register others to vote. And on that tip, this is our last invited speaker. Luke Warford is with the Texas Democratic Party, and he's headed up their voter registration program amongst many other important efforts, including voter protection, making sure that people could get to the polls without obstacle. He came out to Midland from Austin, wanted to just see if anybody was going to come out on this summer day, and wanted to also have a chance to talk with you all. So ladies and gentlemen, this is Luke. Come on up, Luke.
Hey everyone, thank you, thanks so much. John, we'd love to see it. Announcing early candidate recruitment, that's so important to the party. If anyone else is interested in running for office, I will be around after, would love to talk to you. I'll be brief because would love to get to folks' questions and have more of a conversation. Thank you so much to Powered by People for convening this important conversation. I remember in 2018 watching Beto run for Senate, and just the amount of volunteer excitement across the state was incredible. And so many candidates, after they run, maybe don't keep that going, don't keep working. And Powered by People's volunteers across the state have continued to do that, have continued to show up in off years. In June of 2021, y'all are out here, and that's truly incredible. I also want to thank the Midland County Democratic Party for convening this. This is incredible. Woo! Thank you, Kathy. So I just want to make a couple quick remarks. I think, as folks have talked about, this was a tough legislative session, and SB 7, we've killed it temporarily. Our legislators had the confidence to do something that has only happened 4 times in Texas history before, to break quorum, to walk out of the Capitol building because they did not believe that this law was in the interest of Texans. And I just want to take a second to acknowledge all of the folks that are here that wrote letters, that made phone calls, that used their voice to make sure that that our elected officials knew that they had our support, because I genuinely do not believe that without all of your support that they might not have been emboldened to take that action. So thank you so much for that. The other thing that's incredibly clear coming out of this legislative session is that ultimately what we need to do to stop Republicans from making laws that maybe we don't believe in or aren't in the interest of Texans is we need to win elections, right? And as Beto talked about and others have talked about, voter registration is absolutely fundamental to that. And so what we've done, we've got a voter registration plan together that we'll be rolling out next week. We're working with our county parties across the state. We want to register voters everywhere in Texas, not just in Houston and in Dallas, but in Midland County and Ector County and in Lubbock and El Paso, all over the state. We have to be registering voters everywhere in order to set ourselves up, and candidates like John Love, to set them up to ultimately win
Set me up.
in November, but 3 Novembers. So if you're, we can't do that work alone. It's so important. If you become a volunteer deputy registrar, get in touch with your county party. Make sure you sign up on one of the forms that are here. You can go to texasdemocrats.org to learn more about the work we're doing. And again, thank you all so much for being here. This is truly inspiring to see so many folks coming out in June of an off year, and it's great to be in Midland.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Luke. Okay, we will now we'll now take this mic out into the audience. I'll grab this mic without it feeding back, hopefully. And anybody who would like to make a point, is this working? Okay, anyone who would like to make a point or ask a question, and it does not have to be of me or directed towards me, but I'm happy to answer it if you do have one for me. But I want to get as many people into the conversation as possible. And so if you'll raise your hand, Cynthia Cano, who's right over here, we'll bring the microphone over to you. And if you wouldn't mind just telling us your first name, if you will, and then we'll take it from there.
My name is Levita, and Mr. O'Rourke, thank you for coming. And I have a friend who lives near Del Rio, and she is very upset and very embittered about the border crisis. She sees the reports and she sees the people coming in daily. What advice would you have for her if you could talk to her?
Levita, thank you for asking. I'll tell you, I was just in Del Rio maybe a month or two ago, and I met with folks in the community. Also had a chance to meet with the mayor of Del Rio, who was really concerned. And one of the things that I've learned by going to Del Rio, going a little bit further south to Laredo, Texas, is that a lot of this border traffic, including of asylum seekers, is coming into Del Rio because the cartels that control the plaza, the pathway in Laredo, are pushing them out. They don't want those asylum seekers and immigrants, those young mothers and their young children, to disturb their ability to bring drugs into the United States. It's an incredibly profitable business, and they don't want them in the way. So they're pushed to communities like Del Rio that have never seen this level of crossing attempts or asylum applications before, and they're understandably overwhelmed. And I think and I'll speak for myself, I think someone who's been a fierce advocate for immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, and I have been, I also have to understand the impact that has on communities who don't have the capacity, who literally do not have the space or the beds or the food or the tax base to be able to take care of these people. And I live in one of those communities. I live in El Paso, Texas, and it's connected to Ciudad Juarez, and we have a large refugee camp, for lack of a better term, on the southern side of the border in Ciudad Juarez. But it's hitting Del Rio really hard right now. And what I would ask of the president, and I would ask this if he were a Democrat or a Republican, is that he make this a priority, and make it a priority not at the border. If we're addressing the problem once someone has arrived, it's too late. It's not like you're going to send them back 2,000 miles. I mean, some may try to do that, but what I have learned from listening to these families is they'll be right back here next year. If you have been flooded out of your home with devastating climate change-induced storms, if you've also survived droughts that don't allow you to feed yourself or your family, if you're living in one of the deadliest countries, bar none, on the face of the planet, if your kid's life is at stake, then you're going to make that trip to America. I would do the same thing, by the way. I've got 3 kids. If one of them was going to be killed, or I had a good idea that one of them was going to be killed, you better bet your ass I would be up 2,000 miles, 4,000. I would take a trip to the moon if it would save their lives. That's what these families are doing. But some are bearing the cost or the brunt of that more than others. So I think President Biden needs to do more by going to El Salvador, to Honduras, to Guatemala, helping those countries address the underlying causes. Some of them, frankly, we don't want to talk about it, but exacerbated by U.S. policy and the things that we do in this country. The war on drugs, illegal drug consumption, just to begin with, the civil wars we got involved in the 70s and the 80s, all the people that we deported after they were in prison in the U.S. and started gangs like MS-13 that imported back to a defenseless population in El Salvador. I could go on all day. But that's not Del Rio's problem. So let's help them out. And at a minimum, we should help them by defraying 100%, 100 cents on the dollar of the cost to Del Rio for enduring this. But then we've got to address the problems in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and those Central American countries. So thank you for raising it. Please know that I've been to Del Rio twice recently to be there on the ground. All right, we've got another question over here. Yes, sir.
Hello, Beto. My name's Axel Garcia. I'm a part of the Texas Young Democrats, and I'm the Edgar County Democrats.
Way to go.
My question was, we always think about voter eligibility, but in 2020, 5.2 million Americans were and still are disenfranchised due to past felony convictions. People such as my mother and my sister, who actually voted for you in 2018, and she did it out of fear, actually, because she told me even when she got her voter registration card, she said, "Can I do it? Will I go back to jail? They will not vote." So my question would be, how as a people and you as a candidate or as a future candidate or wherever you find yourself,
Or a guy who hangs out in public parks with a microphone. That's my current title.
What can we do, or how can we make the criminal justice system no longer intimidate and disenfranchise former incarcerated who are not only excluded from the economy, but from the democratic process as well?
for asking the question, and appreciate you sharing your family story so that we all are brought into why this is important. You know, it's just a statistic or a number if we keep it at that level. You brought it down to a human level, so I hear you. We in the United States put more people behind bars than does any other country on the face of the planet. We in Texas put more people behind bars than does any other state in the country that puts more people behind bars than any other country on the face of the planet. So this is a real problem in Texas. What a lot of us don't know, what a lot of returning citizens, those who've been incarcerated, don't know, is that once you've done your time, you've satisfied your fees and your fines, you're actually eligible to register to vote. Now, Texas does a really good job of keeping that quiet and hiding that from the people who could most benefit from that. You know, you're talking about your family, our families, our state. The For the People Act, I keep pushing on y'all. That's the only thing that I'll peddle in this part. The For the People Act, in addition to all the great things that I mentioned earlier, would restore voting rights to everyone who has served time in this country. And let's be honest with ourselves about who served time in this country. Why do we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet? Through the war on drugs, which was really a continuation of this malign interpretation of the 13th Amendment. It said slavery's outlawed, except when you committed a crime. Involuntary servitude is outlawed, except when you committed a crime. You know, we got some history today from John Love. I'll tell you another Texas story real quickly. In Fort Bend County, in the mid-1870s, half of the elected officials in Fort Bend County, Texas, where you have Sugar Land and Katy, half of the elected officials were black. Through political violence, where some of those officials were killed, run out of town, then Governor Sol Ross, who'd been an officer in the Confederate Army before he was the governor of the state of Texas, imposed a peace on Fort Bend County that resulted in all of those office holders having to leave town. Not too long thereafter, the Imperial Sugar Company, which is still in existence, built upon the vestiges of an old plantation, begins making deals with the white Democrat sheriff to arrest black men and black boys in Fort Bend County who no longer had any political protection because their parents couldn't participate in the democracy that they were entitled to as citizens, were arrested at will for whatever, for being black really, but for loitering, for looking at a white woman the wrong way, for whatever, but to satisfy the labor needs of the Imperial Sugar Plantation. I'll tell you what, to bring it to 2021, Fort Bend Independent School District a couple of years ago is clearing land for a new school building. They uncover a mass grave. Within it are the bodies of black men and black boys, and they can tell from the evidence that some of them were literally worked to death. Their muscles were torn from the bones in their body. So when we think about the history of mass incarceration, who it was focused on, when I mentioned that we have the biggest prison population in Texas, in the country that has the biggest prison population on earth, the biggest population within that population is black and brown. More likely to be stopped and frisked and arrested and incarcerated and forced to check a box in every employment application form thereafter saying they have a conviction. In many states, unable to vote. In this state, maybe too scared to engage with their government again to get registered to vote, even though they're entitled to and they're allowed to because of legislation passed in the state of Texas. So, my very, very long answer to your very simple, short, direct question, we got to pass the For the People Act. It's what gets us back on track. Thank you for asking the question.
Hi there, my name is Daniel Van Nuys, and I'm the Vice President of the Midland Young Democrats here. Quick two-part question. First and foremost, would you honor Midland by making a very special announcement today that you might be pondering? Second, what can we be doing to better protect our LGBTQN plus individuals in Pride Month? I'm a happy member of the queer community, and I feel like we can be doing more in this state.
Go Daniel, man. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your public service and being part of the party. and being part of getting people engaged, because I know that's what you do day in and day out. I happened to be, and Luke might have been there at the same time, I was in one of those Senate committee rooms where they were about to debate SB 7, this voter suppression bill that we keep bringing up. And they had a lot of other bills to hear that day. Really important stuff like, there was a bill where they were going to punish, sports organizations that didn't play the national anthem before sports. That is, I want the national anthem played. I'm not going to deny that, but is that the most important pending thing in a state where 700 people died because we couldn't keep the damn electricity on? Or in a state where 50,000 people were killed by a virus because we dropped all public health protections? Like, fix that stuff first, and then we'll get the sports games and the national anthems working. The second bill, before we heard SB 7, was a bill that was a solution in search of a problem. They were going to outlaw transgender girls from playing in high school or middle school or elementary school athletics. Because there's a crisis of transgender girls in this country taking over middle school and elementary school athletics, right? There, of course, is not. But it's a great way, if you are a Republican, unfortunately, in this day and age, to rile up your base and to find another. Someone who's a little bit different, that you can make fun of or try to scare somebody about, and then make legislation on it, and go home to adoring crowds and say, you stop those transgender kids from ruining your girls' soccer team. Well, I'll tell you what got me more than anything else, and man, it choked me up at the time, was these parents and these transgender kids who travel to the Capitol from Corpus Christi and from Del Rio and from Dallas and from Midland, and patiently and graciously and generously explain to the members of the Senate committee, look, you may not know what you're doing to my kid right now, but she's 4 times more likely to take her own life because of the way that people like you make her feel about herself, that she's wrong, she wasn't born right, she doesn't belong, and we are the ones raising her. And you're hurting her. I just want you to know that. And they say it patiently, more patiently than I could, I think, as a parent. And they said, every legislative session, it's the same game. In 2017, you were trying to ban transgender kids from bathrooms because there's some crisis around transgender bathroom access in Texas, I guess. And we made the same trip up from Corpus Christi, Del Rio, Midland, Dallas. And we're doing it again in 2021. I bet you we'll be back in 2023. You do this to us every single time. And that got me. That is courage to be on the road, for that kid to step up to the mic and say, I want you to understand my life from my perspective before you start legislating me away from being able to play sports. One of the few things that makes me feel good about myself, where I feel like I just fit in with the rest of the kids and I'm just like everyone else. You're going to take that away from me now too? Luckily, thanks to you and others and advocates who stepped up and spoke out and traveled to the Capitol, that bill was, for the time being, temporarily defeated. But as John warned us, as Gene warned us, as Luke warned us, there will be a special session of the state legislature this summer. And our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has threatened that this will be one of his top priorities. Not the electricity grid, not preventing the next pandemic, not making sure that we move the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to something you can actually live on, not taking a state that is the least insured in the nation, where people routinely die of diabetes and the flu and curable cancers, and making sure that we at least expand Medicaid. None of that is a priority. But messing with these transgender children and trying to scare the rest of the state somehow is. So, Daniel, we need more of you, more of us, doing more of what you did over the course of this legislative session to stop them when they bring it back up again. And then, as John said, and as Luke said, and as Gene said, we need to start winning some damn elections, right? So are you all committed to registering people to vote to make sure that we do that in 2022? Let's change the people in the legislature so that those kids don't have to keep driving up there. All right, Cynthia's got a mic at the back.
My name is Paul Garcia. I'm a volunteer for making awareness for deported veterans. We've been from El Paso all the way to Houston. And we remember when you were down there and had Escobar's office in El Paso. The deported veterans asked me to give you a T-shirt, which I found ways to get it to you, because of the political stuff. You can't donate, stuff like that. Anyway, it got to the people around you, the administrative, the people that are helping you out. And I went back there this Memorial Day to Juarez, where they're at. And they asked me if you were still in the fight for them. So my question to you is, when you're the governor of Texas, they're talking about Texas being an example to all the other states as to how great Texas is to be in. So what do you know and what do you say about making a petition to Biden, because we have him on film as promising that if a soldier should serve his country, there's no way that anybody can kick him out. And what we're getting from the public is the same thing. Everybody is asking me if there's a law that says that if you serve for the armed forces, I did 7 years for the Army. So if you were to do service for a country, what right do they have to kick you out and say that you're not because of unfinished paperwork? Is the reason, the administrative part of why deported veterans are over there, away from their family for the ground that they fought for. So if you don't mind commenting on some of that.
Paul, absolutely. Paul, I bet you know this, and I want to thank you for your service, and by the way, the service of anyone here who put on the uniform, put their life on the line for this country. The most highly decorated veteran from the state of Texas in all of World War I was an undocumented immigrant from Chihuahua who happened to be working in El Paso. The United States entered the First World War, and he signed up. And he was told by his drill sergeant, it shows here that you're not a citizen. You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. Every man in this unit's going to France, but not every man's coming back home, at least not alive. And he said, nope, I'm in. I'm an American. Whether it says it on paper or not, I'm committed to this country. Comes back the most highly decorated Texan to serve in the First World War. While Trump was trying to build walls, the county of El Paso actually built a bridge dedicated to him to the city of Ciudad Juarez. There's a bill, as you know, that's pending in the Congress right now, which would expedite the return of veterans who've been deported. It doesn't go far enough because it essentially reverses the deportations that occurred during the Trump administration. And we need to look at all deportations throughout history. I mean, in my book, if you were willing to put your life on the line, like you were willing to die for this country, then there is a debt of gratitude we'll never be able to fully repay. But the least that we can do is to make sure that you could be in this country as a U.S. citizen. You proved yourself beyond what most people in this country prove in terms of their loyalty and their dedication. So I support that bill. And in fact, a veteran in McAllen, Texas, reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, and we worked together to find every Texas representative who's not yet on that bill so that we could get in touch with each of them. And look, it may have been a matter of oversight. Maybe they didn't know the bill existed. Maybe they hadn't heard from veterans in their community. But one by one, we're getting them signed up. So please tell our friends in Ciudad Juarez that we're with them. Estoy en la lucha con ellos. I'll do everything I can to make sure that their service is honored, including by ensuring that they return to the United States. Thank you, Paul, for being here. Appreciate that. Yes, Ms. Conner. There you go.
Good evening. My question is the Second Amendment question. It's hard for me to understand why, with all the mass murders that's happening in our country, that we as a country won't stand up and actually protect the Second Amendment. Those of us that understand history, the Second Amendment was put into the Constitution to protect our country in its infancy when it was established. With all the mass murders that has happened, how can we allow AK, whatever they're called, multiple shooting weapons, to be on the streets, and we can go and give weapons without a background check now? How ludicrous is that? And I was just wondering, as governor, How would you address that situation? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. There were, Texas, you probably know this, had one of the better license to carry laws in the country prior to this session. You had to have some level of training, you had to go through some kind of background check before we said, you can carry a gun in public, because that's not just an unrestricted right. We know, given the number of people who die in this country every year, that it's a real responsibility. And we could point to other states that didn't have a licensure process and say, look, in Texas, many of us, maybe most of us here, are gun owners or have a history of using firearms, going hunting with our grandparents, or keeping a firearm at home for self-defense or protection or target practice or whatever. It's none of my business, really. What becomes my business, and I think the public's business, is when we realized that last year there were 6,000 licenses to carry a firearm that were denied. Meaning somebody tried to have the ability to carry a firearm out in public, and there was something in their record, something about what they'd done. Maybe it was domestic abuse, maybe it was the use of violence against somebody in the community before, but local law enforcement or the judiciary stepped in and said, I don't think this person should have a firearm out there. That's a danger to the public health and safety. That's why you have police chiefs. And do we back the blue or not? That's why we had police chiefs and officers from across the state step up and say, this idea of constitutional carry, in other words, anyone without a background check can take a firearm out into the public. That's a bad idea. They're not saying they're against guns. Let's be clear. They're not saying they're against the Second Amendment. Let's be clear about that as well. They're just saying they are for responsible ownership and use of firearms. That's not asking too much. And when you add that to these awful mass shootings, and we know the big ones, you know it better than anyone. El Paso knows it better than anyone. Sutherland Springs knows it better than anyone. Santa Fe High School. Those are 4 of the worst mass shootings in American history. They all happened in the same state within a 3-year period. And those are the ones I can name off the top of my head. There's a mass shooting almost every single day in this country. Are we numb to it? Are we inured to it? Do we not allow ourselves to be shocked by the senseless loss of life? I don't think that describes us. We may be deterred sometimes, and may grow a little desperate when we see all of our best efforts, calling and talking to our legislators, turn into, instead of gun safety in Texas, more gun violence in Texas and more easier access to guns. So I don't know, if I were in a position of power or public trust to do something about it, I would do something about it. And I know full well this is not always the most popular issue in the world to take a stand on. Or otherwise we'd have done something in this country after Sandy Hook, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, after kids at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School were murdered in the halls where they learned. When little kids are killed and we don't do anything, we've got a problem in this country. And we are not bad people. But I firmly believe it comes back to everything that we spoke about at the beginning of this conversation today. When our democracy is not truly representative, when it listens to where money and power and corporate interests lie, and the NRA is the textbook example of that, then you get policies that don't represent the people, but represent the money and the manufacturers and the bottom line and the profits that these companies make. That's what's happening in this country when it comes to gun violence. And so my pitch for the For the People Act, if you think the system's rigged, you're right. If you think the playing field is tilted, spot on. The only way to unrig it, the only way to get it something close to level, the only way your voice and your vote is really, truly going to matter, is to make sure that we reset and expand this democracy. The only bill that does it is that For the People Act. Literally, this is the same choice that LBJ faced in '65 about whether or not we're going to be a multiracial democracy. And he did the tough political thing because MLK, Andrew Young, all of us who were alive at the time, gave him the power to do it. Forced him to do it, in other words. That's what we got to do right now. We got to give those folks the power, force them to do it. And that's how we make progress on gun violence, on a minimum wage, on health care, on climate, on the things that we care most about that affect us in our day-to-day lives. So thank you for that question. That was great. Let me just allow him to finish his comment.
There's one thing that really baffles me about this. They'll say, hey, well, we want people that have mental issues or whatever. I've always described it to be sane. You can be sane in 1 hour. An hour later, you could have some catastrophic incident to happen, and you lose your faculties. You know, my thing is that I'm not against weapons. I cannot understand somebody having a weapon that will shoot 100 times on the streets. It makes no sense.
I agree with you. Yes, sir.
Ron Johnson, neighbor from Odessa. Happy to be down in Midland today. Something about this last summer and the death of George Floyd that really motivated me was that a part of the American fabric is to put our bodies on the line for justice. And thinking about the For the People Act, thinking about the grandstanding that we're seeing from Joe Manchin, Christian Sinema, thinking about the blatant autocracy that we're seeing from the right and from the Texas legislature. I think, I don't want to question you as our next governor, but I think you're missing one step, and that's how do we get a critical mass of people in the streets to show this country and the leadership that we're still activated, that we're still mobilized, that we're willing to put our bodies on the line the same way Martin Luther King mobilized hundreds of thousands of people across this nation, the same way we see people mobilized across this nation and the world to fight for democracy, because I don't want to end up like Belarus, where it's too late, and when we're protesting, the fascism is already taking over. So what can we do to organize a critical mass in Washington, on Austin, on Odessa, on Midland, wherever, to stop this?
Thank you, Ron. That was great. So I know you've watched it, but for anyone who has not, on March 15th, 1965, President Johnson gave a speech to a joint session of Congress. This is after MLK and Andrew Young helped him to find his power. And he's convening Congress to ask them to pass the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And to Rod's point, it had been 8 days before, it was the 7th of March, 1965, that John Lewis attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, trying to march to Montgomery for voting rights, and was beaten just about to death. They didn't kill him, they almost did, within an inch of his life. And President Johnson refers to Bloody Sunday. He says a week ago, people were almost killed trying to secure this right that you, the members of Congress right now, can confer with this vote for this important piece of legislation. To Rod's point, part of the way that they helped President Johnson get that power is they put their lives on the line. They got out in the streets. We're not going to win this one on Twitter or on Facebook or on MSNBC. And I know, I love all those platforms and have spent some time on them. But that's absolutely insufficient to the task. As Rob reminds us, we lose this slip that we're on turns into a slide, it's gone forever. You will never, ever get it back. This rule by law and by people freely choosing those who will represent them is the exception in world history, not the rule. It flourished for a little while in 5th and 4th century BC Athens, and then it's gone for millennia. And then it reappears by stages in America. First it's white men with property, then it's white men with no property, and then it becomes a multiracial democracy briefly during Reconstruction, and then that closes up again. Then the 19th Amendment extends it to women, and it felt like we were making progress, and even that it was inevitable, and we misread the Martin Luther King line that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, like it was just going to happen, sit back and enjoy it. But it's not. We got to bend it, and we got to be in the streets to do it. You can't bend it at home. You can't bend it online. You can't virtually bend this. You got to seize it with your hands. And part of the reason that I'm in this park with you and I hope you're in this park with me, because I didn't know what more to do, but it definitely felt, to your point, like I wasn't doing enough at home. I wasn't doing enough in El Paso, and I knew if we gathered, something good was going to come of it. And so I think you just said that you're willing to lead us. Those of us who want to join you in a march in Odessa or a march in Midland, I'd love to be back for that. And maybe we do that in every community that we visit. And maybe taking a page out of the book of history, and looking back at 64 and 65, maybe there should be a march on Washington. And maybe that should be all of us caravanning up there. I mean, we spent a year at home. We need a good excuse to get out and be with one another anyhow. And what better cause than democracy? So I'm with you. Point well taken. Yeah. Hi.
Hey. So my name is Sarah, and I just moved to Midland about 3 months ago from Houston. Was honestly terrified because Houston is a much more democratic area coming here. Took a leap of faith moving here. And I feel like you stole my question. She was already standing here. I mean, my question is, I'm exhausted. Like, I'm emotionally exhausted. Like, and I feel like I'm wearing your shirt. You know, like, your campaign energized me. First time I block walked, I canvassed, you know. And so it's like, how do you not let that exhaustion take over you and keep showing up? And I feel like this is a great, you know, you're quite cute. It's the same question. And I love it. And I want to come do a march with you. So maybe this isn't even a question.
Rod, how does Sarah get in touch with you? I mean, I feel like you're one of the leaders here, and certainly in terms of taking action. And I want to make sure we can all follow you. And so, if Cynthia, if you'll help us all stay in touch. Actually, that's another good reason to sign in on the clipboard. I want to make sure that I keep us all connected. And as Shirley says, and register to vote and become a BDR. You know, like you, Sarah, I this last year being at home. Watching what happened in our United States Capitol on the 6th of January, watching what our junior senator did to incite that insurrection, and then after his colleagues were almost killed, went ahead and voted to overturn the election and keep it going. You can almost get down. You're tempted to despair. But that might be the end of us if we allow that to happen. And so I think what you're saying, what Rod's saying, I think what I'm trying to say is action is the antidote to despair. When we're moving, I didn't know what I would find in Midland, in this park. I found all these amazing, beautiful people who want to get after it and make sure that we make the most of this moment. I'm not leaving this feeling any despair at all. I mean, I am fired up and wired right now. And if Rod said, follow me to the courthouse, I would follow him to the courthouse. So,
amen.
Let's all stay together, stay in touch, and Sarah, Rod, and whoever else wants to lead this, I'm behind you, 100%. We'll help amplify.
There's a lot of hands up. I'm really sorry. We only have time for 4 more.
Hi, my name's Diane. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dad.
My 94-year-old dad really worked hard for you when you ran for Senate, and he still loves you. I have a question. It's a little bit controversial, I know, but my son is a veteran. He was deployed to Afghanistan 2 or 3 times. I cried most of the time, so I don't know how many. But he came home with PTSD, came home with TBI, constant pain. Is it possible, maybe when advocate's gone and maybe federally, that decriminalization of marijuana might help?
Thank you, Diane. Yes, I mean, Diane made the case for us. Most of the country has legalized marijuana or cannabis, whatever you want to call it, pot. And in this state, we're still putting people behind bars. And I've had folks your dad's age pull me aside at meetings like these and say, you know, I have fibromyalgia. It is the worst thing in the world to live with. I can't sleep, I can't think, I can't concentrate. I was on a cocktail of prescription drugs that made me a zombie. And then they say this part in a whisper, my son got me some pot. And you know what? My appetite returned, my focus returned, I felt good, I can sleep again. Why am I a criminal in the eyes of the law in Texas for just taking care of myself? And those veterans who are prescribed incredibly addictive drugs by the VA, because the VA by law is not allowed to prescribe them cannabis, to which you won't become addicted, by which you cannot overdose and die. And I'm not saying that there aren't consequences and side effects of using marijuana, especially for the very young, when your brain's still forming. It's a really bad idea. But for those who need it, and in my opinion, this may also be controversial, Dan, for those adults who want to use it and don't want the government in their business, let's legalize it in the state of Texas for all those reasons. Yeah, thank
you. My question is on ranked choice voting. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you feel with it. Personally, I've done a lot of research, and it seems like it'd be a good method of election reform that would actually bridge our divides within the country, our political parties.
I love this question. It's about ranked choice voting, and I was talking about the 5 challenges that we're up against. My last one was the death of bipartisanship and any kind of kindness in our politics anymore. And the way we have this winner-take-all, system of elections right now, where I'm just going to make you, if you're my opponent, look as bad as I possibly can. And the worse you're off, the better I'm off. Ranked choice voting, for those who aren't familiar with it, says that as the voter, I rank the candidates, 1 through 5, if there are 5 candidates. And instead of a contested election going to a runoff, if no one surpasses 50% of the vote, then you start looking at the second choices. And that's how you get to 50%. In other words, and I don't know if I'm doing the best job explaining this, but in other words, it forces that kind of, civility that I think we used to have in our politics, where I'm not gonna dump all over you or call you awful names, because I want your voters to pick me as the number 2 guy. And if I upset them by being dishonest or maligning your name, then they're going to put me at number 5. And so we have an incentive to be kind and to appeal to as broad a cross-section of voters as possible. You no longer paint one part of the community or the country as the enemy because you want their votes. You've created an incentive to be good to people and to appeal to people and to talk to people and to listen to people, probably most importantly. So I like it in those communities and states that have implemented ranked choice voting. It's also saved them a lot of money on not having to fund runoff elections. So when you are governor, I hope that's something that you will.
Go to your left, Beto.
Got it.
Hello, my name is Chloe, and I've been interested in politics for as long as I can remember. And as I'm getting older, I realize that I have an even louder voice than what I might have had in 2016 in 4th grade when our ex-president Trump was elected. And I have been very passionate about issues that have involved minors and our safety. And I would just like to express some anger that I've had with most recent laws being passed, like abortion laws, as a 14-year-old. And generally, what can minors and people my age do to be more involved and get laws like that out?
Yeah, thank you for being here, for asking the question. It takes that kind of courage, getting up and speaking in front of a lot of people, many of whom you may not know, about a really important, definitely controversial and highly personal issue like abortion or reproductive health care. But if you don't do that, it's not going to change. And you will continue to have either the status quo or something much worse, like the recent abortion bill that passed in Texas, which criminalizes abortion and allows anyone, even someone not involved or not even from this state, to pursue a doctor or somebody who has received reproductive health care. So I mean, I hate to turn it around back on you, but I think it's you, and I mean, and it's all of us. But speaking up, speaking out, making that trip down to Austin and confronting your legislators where they are, talking about what it means to you. I don't know if you saw the Paxton Smith video, if you all saw that, the valedictorian up in North Texas who used her valedictory speech to, you all remind me a lot of each other, of having that courage, and I'll tell you what, your question shocks me out of any complacency I might feel to say, you know what, this is Texas, and I guess it's just going to get worse and worse, and what can we do? We just have to wait down the road to win future elections. You know, I think Paxton lit a fire with that speech. I think you're lighting fire for me and everyone who's listening to you right now by coming out here. That's what it's going to take. And then there's this, and it's maybe in some way connected to this ranked choice voting question. I think listening to those with whom we disagree, who may consider themselves pro-life and want to outlaw abortion, and understanding where they're coming from and why they feel that way, and where there might be common ground. My mom, who raised me as a Catholic and is a very devout Catholic herself, and lifelong Republican, and you know, I'd probably characterize her as pro-life. We had some really good conversations, and one of them is about how Texas has become the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis. Women are dying here at a frightening rate, and black women are dying at 2 to 3 times the rate that white women are dying in the state of Texas. And when you look at how successfully Texas has limited access to reproductive health care, which could also mean a cervical cancer screening, or just being able to see a doctor in the least insured state in the union, you begin to understand the toll that is taken on Texas women. And when I shared that with my mom, she said, I had no idea that these things were connected. Or I said, you know, maybe you didn't know that Texas is first in the country in the rate of repeat teen pregnancy, because we don't make contraception available. We don't really have sex education. I mean, mine, when I was growing up, was limited to a drawer full of condoms that my dad showed me, and then closed the drawer and said, I have no idea how many are in here. That was my sex ed talk. And I received nothing else in school. I think that having these conversations with one another, I hope breeds some empathy and some understanding. And you know, though I'm a Democrat, I don't think that all the Republicans and all the Republican legislators are bad people or want to hurt you or me or my kids or the people around me. I like to think that maybe they just don't know. And in the same way that those transgender children and their families took the time to come to the Capitol and explain to those legislators the impact it was having on them, maybe, just maybe, that's why that bill never succeeded, despite being a priority of both the governor and the lieutenant governor. So, I mean, no pressure, but we're counting on you to be able to make that trip and to talk some sense into these folks, and also to listen to them, which I can tell, even knowing you just briefly through this meeting, that you would do. So anyhow, thank you. Thanks for raising the question. Appreciate it.
All right, this is going to be our last question tonight.
Great.
My name is Bella. First, thank you for coming to Midland. We have some trucks and that can be a bit of fun. Second of all, I just have a question. I work for Texas Rising in San Antonio, and we're all about getting young voters engaged in progressive politics. And some of the conversations we've had with young people have just been like, they don't care, either because, you know, the demographics of the electorate aren't reflected in the legislature, both the state and federal, or their political socialization is just different. So what do you suggest, not only to educators, but also to members of the community, to, you know, help people come to care about politics, come to care about like who's in office, and just like about the issues that you spoke about earlier?
Yeah, Bella, thanks for asking the question. Thanks for the work you're doing. One thing I've learned is that young people aren't dumb, and they get perhaps better than older people, that this system is rigged, right? Like they've got no tolerance for BS or platitudes or explaining away a problem that's very obvious. And so all those things I tried to talk about earlier, the tilted playing field, the rigged system, some votes counting more than others. In Texas, the racial gerrymander that has drawn people of color out of congressional districts to diminish their vote, the power of big money and corporations. And I'm not trying to be a downer or dissuade anybody from participating, but I think young people make a pretty quick calculation and size up the situation and say, you know what? I hear my civics teacher talking about the importance of voting, and I heard Beto on his high horse saying if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. But I'm smart enough to realize that who am I up against these other unaccountable powers? Someone mentioned the NRA earlier. And I don't think that's a dumb conclusion to reach. I wish those young people who do reach that conclusion would reach another one, but I don't think that's, no one should judge them for reaching that. It's all the more reason, in my opinion, that we fix our democracy and we reduce the power of big money and corporations, and we make sure that every vote counts equally. We don't have gerrymandering, especially racial gerrymandering, and we stop these voter suppression bills, which are so often targeted at young people. Have any of you heard of Prairie View A&M in Waller, Texas? They divided that college campus in two different precincts to make it very hard and confusing for the students to know where to register. And do you blame an 18 or a 19-year-old? I remember what I was like at that age, for just saying, I give up. I guess you don't want me to vote. Or they moved the early voting location from that majority black campus from the campus 6 miles away, despite the fact that most of those young people don't have a car. They're forced to walk 6 miles in order to be able to vote. So Texas tries pretty hard to keep young people from voting. I think that's why we've got to try even harder. If they make it tough, we are tougher. And we get this bill passed, the For the People Act. We follow your lead, and we register young people to vote on these college campuses. And we actually have a Powered by People staff member at Prairie View A&M doing voter registration. And we're going to be working on other college campuses as well. And we'd like to do that work with you. And you wouldn't do this, and I can just tell from the way you asked the question. I think we have to be really careful not to preach, not to judge, not to tell anyone that they're making a mistake. Acknowledge what they see that's wrong in this system and then work to fix it. When they see us do that, I think that they're going to want to be part of the solution. I know. Let's see. Thank you. Thanks for being here, Bella. All right, just final saying we're done. I really want to thank you all for taking the time, taking a chance with your Thursday night to come out and see us and be with us. For those who drove in from Odessa and other communities around here, thank you so much for doing this. To Kathy and everyone who helped to put this together, all the volunteers, thank you. And then to Jean and to John and to Luke and everyone else who asked a question or made a comment, thank you for being here. As Sarah was saying, maybe we were tempted to despair. Now we're fired up. Now we got to go take some action. All right, we'll see you all down the road. Adios. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? I'm live streaming, so hang on. I'm gonna go give this to Cynthia.